Hey folks, we are the NonProphets, a show where we talk about the issues of the day from a skeptical humanist perspective. The NonProphets is a production of the ACA, a 501c3 nonprofit organization dedicated to the separation of religion and government and promoting positive atheism. You can support us on Patreon at patreon.com/thenonprophets. Tell us what you like, tell us what you don't like in the comments, email us at radio@atheistcommunity.org. My name is Johnny Angel, and I'm here today with Malty, Jena Miyu, and Jim. How are y'all doing?
Hey, how's it going?
Hey, Johnny.
Good, Johnny. How about yourself?
I'm all right. Glad to be here, and I'm glad to see your smiling faces. Well, we're recording this today, the day after the election, okay? And we don't know what the results are going to be. So rather than cover some really timely news today, we decided to go into some other topics to talk about, because whatever will be going on in the news when this airs will not be what everyone's talking about. We'll have some out-of-date information. So I hope everyone's okay with that. I know we all have our expectations and our predictions, but I'd rather not go on the record as being just woefully off. I don't know about you. Any thoughts on that?
No, that's fair.
Okay.
Yeah, that's fair. And I think the articles that we're going to cover are pretty timeless, so there's merit to them. Anytime.
Yeah.
Well, that's good. I agree. They're timeless. Well, as long as human beings are around, at least. I mean, when the cockroaches and the turtles gain sentience, then all of this is going to be just historical.
Well, it'll be archaeological of previous civilizations, and they'll be worshiping us as gods, so it'll be okay.
Oh yeah, the turtle people of the future will be like, the mammals. They were concerned about the following topics. Today we're going to talk about Black skeptics uplift their community through social justice. We're going to be talking about science and religion aren't compatible, but only in America. Wonder why that is. We're going to be talking about a looking back segment about Cesare Lombroso, who was an interesting character for good and ill, perhaps. We're going to talk about belief in a controlling God is bad for the environment, go figure, and talk a little bit about the environment. And then we're going to talk about the Michigan Catholic Church doesn't want to mask up because God's image shouldn't be masked. So that ought to be a good one, I think. The links are going to be in the description, and I'm going to try to get those links to our executive producer earlier rather than later so that they're actually in the description in a timely way. So when you're listening to the show or watching the show, feel free to pause it, go down in the description, click on the link, read it, do your own research, and then come back to the article or come back to our video or podcast and hear what we have to say about it. And again, if we don't cover it the way you like, or if you wanted to toss some additional information at us, go ahead, send it to us at our email. Like I said, it was before, it was radio@atheist-community.org. Well, let's go into our first article. Black skeptics uplift their community through social justice. This is through The Independent and through AP Newswire. Jena, were you going to cover the overview of this one?
Yeah, certainly. So pretty much this article is based around a Black skeptic residing in LA named Darren. And so his argument, or his position, I should say, is that Black skeptics really do stand for social justice issues, and they should uplift and increase the community of Black atheism through social justice issues. So given, the history of Christian religion within the Black culture, there is unfortunate reasons as to why Black people and Black culture itself have been synonymous with the Christian faith. And so most enslaved Africans embraced Christianity way back when, because the very idea of salvation, spiritual blessings, and the care for the oppressed paralleled the struggles that they lived through. So when you are fed the narrative of liberation and from a God, through scripture itself, it grounds your humanity and the Black identity, and it validates your right for freedom. And from that grows a community within yourself that grows and congeals Black religion with a Black culture, i.e. creating this community. But this is far from being a thriving community, far from it. But more like a community built on resistance and survival. Resistance against the oppressive nature of America's history against Black people, and the survival to overcome those oppressions. But the tragic irony of all of that lies with the faith itself of nearly, I would say, about 80% of African Americans today, in which they depend upon the Christian faith. So Christianity is oppressive within itself. The feelings of alienation, of feminine oppression, and eventual trauma of clinging on to this belief of an omnipotent God, when this God has this rationale of justifying suffering just to move forward, and deeming it as sensical and necessary is absurd. So with having this crutch on Christianity, relieving yourself as a skeptic from it, they recognize that we want to remove ourselves from that dependency and to start removing ourselves from that being able to survive on it and start thriving instead.
I saw in here, and the person in question here is Darren Johnson. And if you go to the article, I think he's featured. He's a gentleman. He's featured on the front of the article. And he said, the way he sees it, Black people, quote, don't need outside beliefs or higher powers. We have power. We are powerful entities. We need to use that power. And he talks a lot about a lot of the things that the group that he's involved with is into. I know that you mentioned the word social justice issues. Jim, you were going to look at some examples of social justice issues. Did you have any of the ones that you wanted to highlight that were highlighted in this article?
Well, actually, I was going to talk about some of the anti-theist overtones in this article.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. But it's a problem in the atheist community in general. We've got a large population of anti-theists. And it's problematic because, one, you get people to dig their heels in when you oppose what they want. You can present them with all the facts you want, but they will just simply dig in deeper if you're directly opposing their ideas and what they believe in. You don't actually get them to change their mind in that way, or at least it's much harder to do so. So it kind of backfires, in the fact it's called the backfire effect. And we have to be careful as an atheist community that we are more pro-critical thinking, pro-good epistemology than we are anti-theism, because anti-theism is just only one example, or theism is only one example of bad thinking. There's so many other areas of bad thinking. I won't touch on these here in a bit with phrenology and things like that. But we have to be really, really careful, because it really gets into other things as well. We talk about social justice issues. We're going to talk about, okay, so why do you think this type of person who has these characteristics does not deserve the same rights as every other human being on the planet? That's critical thinking skills. That's just because it's related to theist topics and you can use the Bible as an excuse doesn't mean you still, that is the excuse. That's not necessarily the reason. And so we have to get at those reasons that are outside that as well. So I always try to really focus people on not being an anti-theist, but being pro-good thinking, pro-critical thinking, and all that, because it is dangerous. Like I said, backfire on you, and there are so many other things that go with it that we use religion as the excuse for rather than the reason for. So
one of my takeaways from here is how our community, the skeptical, non-believing community, is more than just the apologetics, the counter-apologetics. It's more than just knowing your kalam and your refutations, right? There's a lot of issues. I think of a lot of these issues. I go back and forth. Like, are a lot of these racist issues stemming from religious origins, or are they alongside the religious origins, or do the religious aspects, are they a reflection of some inherent badness tribalism, whatever it might be that is inherent in humanity. I don't know. But one of the things that this article talks about is, and I'll read this. Black non-believers like Johnson have for years been working to redefine what it means to be an atheist. This goes into what you're saying, Jim. A word too often linked to white spaces mostly concerned with creationism and the separation of church and state. Many Black non-believers identify as humanists and challenge Christianity for being linked to racism, capitalism, and sexism. So again, this goes back to this more as skeptics, atheists, non-believers, whatever you want to call the group that we belong to, is we don't just stand for not this. We're just not religion. We're other things too. We're trying to move, I think, generally speaking, the world into a space where there's more respect for others, equality of opportunity, and to minimize some of the I keep on using the word legacy, but the legacy of the badness of the past. And I just don't see religion being the best vehicle for fixing the problems of the past when it's anchored so deeply in the past. The role of women, the role of different races, races in quotation marks, of course. And I think the fact that we are looking forward to find the best ways, not the ways that have traditionally been done, but the best ways. And some of that is some of the hugging people is an old way of looking at of showing compassion, hugging people, handshakes, these friendly things. But some of the things are not. We don't throw everything out. We just throw away the bad stuff out, I think.
Right. Just to bridge, Johnny, what Jim referenced and what you just referenced is the ability to be civil with one another. I mean, I at least for myself, I do not make it an effort to try to deconvert another person or downsize their right to have the belief that they have. I think if we can find some common ground, some cohesiveness, and say, hey, if we have a civil discussion, if we can analyze and see how religion, how history and certain traditions way back when have affected women, have affected homosexuals, have affected a certain class or a certain social economical group of people, certain ethnicities, there have you, certain countries even, we can establish where we can establish where we can work out a way to live better, to treat people better, to not enact laws that harm others but benefit others. And if we can just work that out, I don't know, however long that would take, I think we would be more, it would enable us more and encourage us more to be more out, especially for a Black atheist like myself. And it would encourage more faith or believers to be welcome to hear what we have to say and not hold on to the idea that we're just nasty, loud, arrogant, oh, you think you know it all type of individuals when we certainly aren't claiming that.
Yeah. Malty,
One thing.
Yeah. What did you have on this?
Well, one thing that really struck me in a positive manner about this article is what Darren Johnson was saying about community, about his first experience with the Black skeptics of Los Angeles, and becoming a member and working within that community. And that is one thing that he continues to focus on, is that he wants to build a space, or is happy to help build a space where Black or non-white skeptics can come together and have community. Like he says in the article, my atheism is not a thing of I know better than you and so I'm better than you. I love my people, be they religious or not. I'd rather work with a Black religious person working for Black liberation than a Black atheist who is for social climbing. So when you look at the Pew reports that show that majority of atheists are middle class white male, and only 3% are Black, it makes it. I can see the need is quite a bit more prevalent for those communities, for those people to be able to have community.
Yeah, definitely.
And something else from the article, and I think this goes back to what Jenna was saying, and I think Jim as well. So Hutchinson, who's in here, Sikivu Hutchinson, I apologize.
Yeah, the creator of Black Skeptics of Los Angeles.
Yeah, said, so here we go. There's now greater recognition in the specific struggles that Black, Latino, and other secular groups of color experience around accessing equitable housing and education and public spaces without being profiled by policies such as stop and frisk. There we are right there. He said he'd rather work with, ties into the quote that you'd say, they'd rather work with some of these groups would rather work with religious groups that are dedicated toward tangible, actual change in the world, right? Than just some secular or atheist group that I would assume that just wants to complain and shit over religious people. When I was on AXP, there was some fellow the other week that was talking about he had a calling, he had a mission. And I asked him, well, why don't you dedicate yourself toward real tangible results? Help children read, dedicate your time to those who are actually working toward improving actual measurable results in the world. And this goes back to what I've been trying to say a bit, is I want people to think of atheists not as people who want to sin, right? Or people who are antisocial, or people who are contrarians, or they're always going to argue with you. I want atheists to be almost like, Quakers. I think of Quaker, I think of a peacenik, right? I want people to think, oh, you're a humanist, you're an atheist. That means you're really concerned with making this a great place to live. This is this earth. Maybe you're not concerned about spiritual aspects, but I can count on you to stand up for what's right here in the world that we live in now. And I'm encouraged by seeing this group in LA really focusing on the social issues, not in some abstract way about, making people not believe in superstitions, but in a real tangible way of trying to make our actual lives a better place to be.
Right. Absolutely. It takes the effort of not just us. It takes the effort of even utilizing this platform to reach those that are unreachable. We have prominent names in the Black atheist community: Mandisa Thomas, Candace Gorham, just to name a few. And, we have those prominent names, but unfortunately, they don't have the biggest audience or the biggest backing that they truly do deserve. And unfortunately, I see it for myself, and I see it within myself. It's because there's the fear involved. It's the fear that there is no support system, or there is no community, as Malty so rightfully said, that would help them through, or guide them through that transition of coming out of that religion and supporting them. And they see that as it appears a bit intimidating when
Jenna,
you.
I'm sorry, can I ask you a question? I want you to finish your thought, but then I'd like to ask you a question if I could.
Sure. No, it's a sense of intimidation when you are met with a different group of people, and you want to try to understand and learn and grow from these group of people that you feel that you identify with. But when you don't necessarily meet with their ideals, or they don't necessarily meet with yours, or you don't recognize those people on the other side, it's hard to really fully jump to the other side. And more often than not, a lot of non-believers on the fence slowly go back, just because they already know and are familiar with that community on the other side.
So the question I was going to ask you is this: as a Caucasian non-believer, right? I'm able to switch back and forth very easily. When people find out that I don't have any, I won't say metaphysical beliefs, but I suppose I have some metaphysical beliefs. I don't have any supernatural beliefs. I'm able to have pleasant conversations, and I'm able to cut those conversations off and then engage with religious people on other things. And then I'm able to go into the atheist community and then just talk about Star Trek or video games or whatever it is we talk about, and non-belief. Is that a different experience for you as an African American who exists in both spheres?
It you know who you can safely talk to, and it's a very select few. I've myself, as many have known, if they know me, I am closeted. So only anyone that is privy to the ACD Discord or anyone I have known to online is privy to who I am. So to have that outside safety net or community or someone I can immediately go to for comfort or support or just to chat is difficult. So you often, at least from my experience, are within yourself. You teeter back and forth, questioning silently whether is this a good decision or not, whether if I can find that community or that comfort, even though you truly feel that you don't hold on to this God belief. But at the end of the day, it's I have nowhere else to go or no one else to have that sense of companionship or support from, so you can easily fall back on it. So it's difficult.
Jim, Malty, did either of you have that similar experience? Not from probably not the African American community, because I don't think either of you like identify with that community, but have you had something similar? I know it's going to be different for all of us. We all have different lives, but was there any kind of experience like that where when you weren't completely out as an atheist, or if you always were, that you felt you had to hold back for fear of losing out on maybe your home?
Yeah, I don't talk about it at work at all. It's not a topic I bring up. It's a topic I avoid. Mm-hmm. I don't give out my social media to people at work. I don't generally give it out anyway. I have friends in various circles of my life who eventually find me and they're like, oh, wow. And sometimes it causes a problem, sometimes it doesn't. But and then of course I'm not out to my parents at all, because that would just blow everything up and cause all kinds of problems. And I don't really feel like it's that important to actually destroy a relationship over. So there are some areas where I am worried about it. And, my current employer does, they're large enough to not worry about it too much, but I work for smaller employers where, if they knew I was an atheist, they could fire me pretty easily for being an atheist, or the trust level would go away.
How about you, Malty? Oh, sorry, Jim.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Jim.
Yeah.
For work, a little bit, not so much. Had a Catholic supervisor that I had to be careful with talking about certain aspects. But I'd say mostly it was, I was raised secular. Neither of my parents were religious. We never went to church. I was not indoctrinated as a child. PBS was my indoctrination, Nova, and things like that. But I definitely lost some social groups when the topic came up, and I was honest. And I definitely lost some romantic partners when I felt comfortable enough to be open and with them. Those girlfriends did not stick around very long. So
yeah, I that wasn't an experience that I had, but losing. There's one person I used to know who was really into crystals and all that stuff, and we just went our own way. We went our separate ways pretty early on when that became a subject of conversation. One thing that I have in here, note that I have, is what steps could be made to make atheism more inclusive and increase minority representation. This is a big concern of mine because I look around at the ACA, and when I go online to different groups, if I don't search for a racial or ethnic group specifically, I'll see a lot of people with the pink skin, and that's not the most important thing in the whole wide world, but it is a conspicuous absence of a diverse group of people. So I started asking, what could be done to make it more inclusive and to increase representation? Well, I think everything has to start with yourself first. I'd recommend reading books or subscribe to media by folks in different demographic groups just to find out what their experiences are. There's so much overlap between, and the reason why I asked, what was your experience coming out? What was your experience? And maybe not coming out, but your relation between the two communities that you belong to. It's very different, but it's also very similar, right? We all kind of face that, well, we're a little bit in the closet. We don't talk about it. I got a friend texted me just while this was going on. He knows, but I don't share any of my media with him just because I value his friendship and I'd rather sort of eke that out. And I don't want to have him see me ranting about something that he takes super personal and take it out of context. So I think expose yourself to different media from other people's perspectives. Find out what other atheist groups are doing. Okay. What are their projects? What are their concerns? What are their priorities? Right? Because they might not be what I think they are. I went really quickly. I typed in Black Skeptics of LA, right, on Facebook, and I found Black Skeptics group. And what are they up to? What are they talking about? Well, there's a presentation on the first in the family to go to college. They talk about charity work. They talk about immediate emergency assistance to people that are suffering from food shortages or homelessness problems, right? They're talking about the election, educational justice, anti-racist organizing, state violence, progressive politics. There's an interesting one called Voting While Black, Feminist, and Secular. Teaming up with Latinx groups and Women's Leadership Project to end rape culture, and then teaming up with other humanist groups to grow the community and make the world a better place. And so that led me to another website about great humanist groups promoting progressive values. We're going to have that link in the description for everyone to take a look at. And what I thought was just interesting is there's so much overlap. Maybe we can't, me, Malty, and Jim can't relate to the individual experience, but we can still work with these other groups that are more focused on a particular demographic to all lift ourselves up together, I think, and realize that we need to be having this discussion together because there are issues that affect us as humans, and we all need to be moving this forward.
Absolutely.
So that's what I had for that. And there's a bit more to talk about this, and I don't want that to be my catchphrase. There's so much more we could talk about, but I'd like to move on to the second article, which we have is Science and Religion Aren't Compatible, but Only in America. And this is from, I believe this is from Skeptic. So what I had here is she was talking about, in this article, this is Rebecca Watson, and she was talking about a study that demonstrates how complicated it can be to figure out how religion might harm or help us. And we talked about this in a previous episode about how if you're a Republican or a Democrat, how religion affects your ideals and your voting habits. And it was actually quite complex. But in this particular article, Watson's talking about a study published this past summer in Social Psychology and Personality Science, which I was able to get access to, and I can't share it because it's proprietary. But if you want to find it, the link will be in the description. I think you have to have a subscription, but I know someone who knows someone. And that it's called Religious Americans Have Less Positive Attitudes Towards Science, but this does not extend to other cultures. So this article in Skeptic talks about the different experiments, and we won't go through all of them because the article doesn't go through all of them, but I thought it was really interesting. So there's 5 different experiments. Researchers first polled Americans by asking them to rate their religiosity and their interest in science. In each experiment, they varied how they figured out the interest in science because that's kind of a vague data point. In some experiments, they asked subjects to choose from a list of topics they wanted to read about. And in others, they asked them to state how much they agree with statements like, quote, "It's not important to know about science in everyday life." But for pretty much everyone, this is Watson's words, they found out that the more religious a subject was, the less interested in science they were. There was a sixth experiment where they looked at international polling, and they went across 40 different countries, and there were a lot of differences there. Similar religion science correlation as the US in some, or in others, not at all. And surprisingly, they found that some countries had the opposite relation, that the more religious people were, the more interested in science they were. And lastly, and we'll talk about it more, in the seventh and final experiment, they went to Brazil, the Czech Republic, the Philippines, South Africa, and Sweden, countries that they picked because they seemed to have varying religion/science correlations, and gave them a similar test that they gave the Americans in the first set of experiment. And they found a weak but positive correlation. The more religious a person is, the more interested in science they were. So it's a lot more complicated than just, are you religious? Oh, then you hate science. And what makes the United States so peculiar in that way? Anybody have any thoughts?
Yeah, I think it has to do a lot with an anti-intellectualist undercurrent that is prevalent in the United States that leads to it. And, you can go look at some of these other cultures, and they put education on a very high pedestal, and they push their kids to go to college. And here in the United States, is actually not as prevalent as it should be. We should be pushing kids into higher education and more education, but you actively have preachers preaching, don't let your kids go to college, that it's the worst thing in the world for them, especially if they're women. And so that's a huge problem, and it's been around since the beginning almost, at least since the 1800s, where you've had a very strong anti-intellectualism, and I think that's a large part of it.
When you look at the northern countries like Sweden you were talking about, and compare the Christianity there, mostly Lutheranism, I think, high amounts, versus the evangelical Christians in the U.S., they could see there's a difference in their view towards education and their view, what type of God, their view of that God itself. What does that God do?
And bridging from that, Malty, the fact that America is based, predominantly Americans hold on to the religion of fundamentalist Christianity, meaning that the literal interpretation they abide by. So they actively push away for any type of indulgence and any type of evidence-based theory, any type of scientific discovery, because if God created, then that's it. There is no evolving from monkeys. There is no vast expansion of the universe. We are it and the only ones, and that is that. So the fact that most Americans are fundamentalist Christians and hold on to the belief of abiding by the true interpretation of the Bible is why we struggle so hard as to not want to also allow ourselves to accept science.
Well, Jenna, I want to weigh in on that one. I don't think the vast majority of Americans are fundamentalist Christians that believe in that. Jim and I know we were both raised Catholic. And there was never, in my experience, that we talked about this a little bit before, an anti-science attitude. Am I right, Jim? That reflects your background?
Yeah. And that, I moved 14 times in 17 years. So I've got a couple of different parochial schools that I went to, Catholic schools that I went to. And that's also why I called it an undercurrent as opposed to a trend or anything, more solid than that, because it is. And it depends on where you go. I don't know that it is even necessarily any particular denomination. I think that the farther evangelical you go, the more likely you are to run into it. But that's not always necessarily the case, which is, I don't think it's quite as solid as that. But and it also depends on, where you are. The farther south you go, the more more likely I think it is to be. Whereas you could have an evangelical from New York City and an evangelical from Georgia, from some little spot on the map, Georgia, and you'd have two very, very different evangelicals there. So, yeah, I think it's a little bit different.
If I could posit a hypothesis, is that it might seem that Americans are more fundamentalist than they are, because I think that the right-wing Christian fundamentalist is punching way out of its weight class. They're very vocal, very mobilized, and they seem to have the ear of politicians. Maybe not the media. I think that the media tends to almost ignore that these folks exist. Although there's a lot of pot shots taken at Mike Pence, right? I don't think that there's really almost like a real honest respect for the fact that these folks are very, very effective at making their political force felt in the highest offices. I remember, Jim?
Yeah, you almost never hear media talk about, Mike Pence being a Christian nationalist, and never being someone who wants to bring about the end times as that is a good thing. You don't hear that type of stuff being talked about in mainstream media, and it should be, because it's an important part of who they are and what they stand for and what they're going to do for. Dominionist is the word I was looking for. Those are important things to know, because they're going to influence how they vote and what they do.
To reel it back to the study, the study's title is "Belief in a Controlling God." This is quote unquote controlling God is bad for the environment, right? So it has to do with not just that they are religious, but what they think that they can do, what the participants, what the people think is actually within their control.
Yeah, good way to bring it back to the article. And when I read that, I was thinking of, and I've mentioned this on the show before, and I've mentioned it in Discord, I'm certain. I was at a happy hour with some old work pals and talking about politics. This is a while ago. This is back in the good old days when you could meet with your friends. And I was talking to one of the friends that I'm always talking about, the super hardcore right-wing Christian fundamentalist who's carrying a gun at all times. And I love him. And I was like, come on, man, though. I mean, all the science says that global warming is a real thing and that it's caused by human beings and that there's going to be an outcome for this. What's with your personal responsibility, the way you always vote? Everyone's got to be personally responsible. And he wasn't drunk. He was fully there. And he's like, Johnny, the Bible says that God is going to end the world, right? So there's nothing that we can do to end it before God ends it. So it's not real.
Mm-hmm.
Why don't you understand? And I'm like, but dude.
It's the classic let go and let God, Johnny.
Yes, it is.
That's it. And I hear it all the time. That's pretty much what it is. And so when you hold on to that, when you just let go and let God, don't lean on your own understanding, walk by faith, not by sight, you just don't care. It almost sounds like they just don't care, right? So when you just hold on to that faith and you're said, well, I mean, God did this for a reason. Oh, that person had to die for a reason. Oh, that hurricane happened because God's angry or something. All this such and such happens for a reason. When you hold on to that, it's almost as if you give up on really actively trying to make change happen. And so when we know within ourselves that we have the ability to enact a change in law, enact a change in how we can change the climate, better management of our earth, our roads, our schools, everything. But most of us refuse to do that because of exactly that example. You just let go and let God. Oh, the world would end at such and such year anyway, like they said 20 years ago. Why does it matter?
Let me say something else here too. We pick on religious conservative types a lot because there's a lot of anti-science that's really easy. It's low-hanging fruit. I did a little bit of research here. Scientific American, this article, it'll be in the description. It's a little old now at this point. Things have developed. But this article, and they didn't cite any reason, they didn't cite any evidence for this, but I want to run this past the panel. Scientific American said Democrats' anti-science tends to be motivated by unsupported suspicions of hidden dangers to health and the environment. Common examples include the belief that cell phones cause brain cancer. High school physics shows why this is impossible. Or that vaccines cause autism. Science has shown no link whatsoever. Republican anti-science tends to be motivated by anti-regulatory fervor and fundamentalist concerns over control of the reproductive cycle. Examples are the conviction that global warming is a hoax, even though billions of measurements show it's a fact, or that we should, quote, teach the controversy to school children over whether life on the planet was shaped by evolution over millions of years or by an intelligent designer over thousands of years, where scientists say it's the former. Of these two forms of science denialism, and it exists on both sides of the aisle, the Republican version is more dangerous because the party has taken to attacking the validity of science itself as a basis for public policy when science disagrees with its ideology. Any thoughts on that?
It's no different from what you've seen in history, like when the Catholic Church would want to impede and oppress their people by hammering them with the book. It's no different from what we see now when they say, oh, removing women's rights to choose and, removing women's rights for access to birth control. Well, it dives right into, you can't play God. You can't just abort that fetus, or you're removing the act of God by having that child, and also it plays into other social issues that, are hounded on by things that the right-wing side wants to use the religion for. So that's my interpretation of it.
Well, what about the libs? What about the libs? And it's funny that
all that woo.
Yeah. Well, the thing about conspiracy theories is that they're at least based on something real, right? Real companies, real things that are actually happening. And so it's easier in a lot of ways, I think, to debunk that kind of stuff or get someone to realize where their thinking is easier in some ways than it is for a religious person who has no there, right? They have to accept as true that a God exists with little to no evidence. Whereas a conspiracy theorist, they don't have good evidence, but they have better evidence than a theist does. For what they believe in at the very least. So I think in some ways, and that's what makes it less dangerous. And I'm not sure that that less is significant, but it is less dangerous and it is easier to work with because at least you could use multiple conspiracies to get them to do something like the old joke is, tell them that the Russians are, if you're trying to get someone to take a vaccine, tell them that the Russians don't want them to do it and give them a conspiracy they can believe in that can only be circumvented by taking the vaccine. So they're a little bit more manipulable, but also I don't think nearly as dangerous, just because there's more there.
Yeah, the Democrats seem to be somewhat the same anti-intellectualism that I'm seeing on the Republican side as well. One moment. Sorry. But so I think there's something in these groups of people, an anti-intellectualism, and also a desire for a simple answers and a feeling of control. So if someone that you trust wants to tell you that you can use peppermint oil It's cheaper. It doesn't have the scary things of being prescribed by a doctor or having harmful side effects that you can actually tell that the medicine is working, like not getting polio, things like that. There's a strive, I think, in some people to try to go for this simpler because it's something that they can understand. And I really feel it to be a detriment to our country that we've moved away from a thought of science being a good thing, knowledge being a good thing. It really does scare me.
I want to cap this off with just I think what we're all saying is it may be a matter of science education as well. That although there may be a willful rejection of science, I think that there's also a lack of understanding of what science actually is. And maybe if people had a better understanding, they might start applying scientific investigative processes toward peppermint oil or whatever it might be. I found an article here, the U.S. National Library of Medicine, National Institutes of Health. Link will be in the description, or I'll eat my hat. A study conducted by Research America finds that almost no U.S. citizens can name a living scientist, and that the few who did would name individuals such as Bill Nye and Neil deGrasse Tyson. The typical working scientist who struggles daily with complicated lab meetings and experiments, revising scientific papers, resubmitting grant applications, and presenting at scientific meetings in front of critical audiences is mostly invisible. The U.S. has little knowledge about what scientists actually do. I think that's a problem. I can tell you a lot about other groups, but I can't. I mean, I'm exposed to a lot of scientists. My friends practice in various fields of science and mathematics, so I'm skewed. But that's probably something. What's that?
Mm-hmm. You're not the only one that's skewed that direction. But also reading more and being more interested in that stuff. Yeah. But I think the other danger that people run into is they think that science is about proving stuff. And to an extent it is, but far more importantly is disproving. I was talking to a moon landing conspiracist who said that the moon landing rover, that there was no place to store it in the moon landing craft. And I was like, okay. And it was literally Moonlander rover, and pick the second hint that came up in the first article, and there's the plans that clearly show how and where the rover was stored. And I asked him, I said, did you try to disprove this? And he said, well, no. And I'm like, well, there's your problem, right? It's not just a matter of proving something is true, because if we wanted to prove Santa Claus exists, that would be fairly easy to do. It's proving he doesn't exist that's a little bit where you actually go, oh, okay, so how would we actually prove that? And we actually start to look at that other side of it. And that is something that people miss. It's also about disproving it.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
How you can prove it.
Also, to that, what people often forget, like most scientists in history were believers too. I mean, you have, for example, Michael Faraday, known for establishing the basis of electromagnetism, in which you can attribute him to discovering the electromagnetic field that he discovered around our planets and stars, right? Classically known, Isaac Newton. He was a physicist, he was a mathematician, but he also was a theologian. Oddly enough, he had his own kind of quirky concepts of God, but he was, in fact, a believer as well. So do we push aside these really prominent, well-known men that have attributed a lot to modern things that we utilize today? No. Just because they had faith beliefs?
Jenna, what a fantastic transition. Because our next subject is one of those individuals from history. And that's going to be in our segment, Looking Back.
Looking Back.
Now, I said earlier that I wanted to say the name Cesare Lombroso. So I've said it twice now. And none of you have gotten a chance to say it. Cesare Lombroso.
Cesare Lombroso, yeah.
I can't roll my R's, so.
I'm probably going to flub it.
What a name. Jenna, why don't you take a stab at Cesare Lombroso? And why do we care about who this is?
So Lombroso was a scientist, a doctor. He did a lot of study, and well known, in fact, from a study he did called The Criminal Mind, or The Criminal Man, I should say. So he did a lot of study around brain pathology and corpses, and he was an Italian doctor. So he wrote this book, as I mentioned, The Criminal Man, a book based on a study of brains of criminal offenders versus non-offenders. So he's pretty prominently known for establishing the idea of phrenology, meaning that you can physically study the traits or physically touch the indentations of your skull to determine if that person was a criminal or not. And so he coined this term, and I'm going to probably flub this, atavistic. So that is a term to mean reference to ancestry humans. So ancestry humans meaning your way back when humans that were primitive in physical traits. So he determined that if they had these type of distinctive and primitive features, that they were deemed more criminal or had more prominence of becoming or performing criminal activities. So we're acknowledging his development, of course, in this almanac, that he is the basis and the founder of the development of modern criminology.
Jim, you had shared with us you wanted to talk about phrenology. You got a kick out of phrenology.
I do, and phrenology, I mean, kind of set the time. This is the 1700s when it's getting its start, and so we don't know a lot about a lot, but we're starting to figure it out, right? It's starting to be the golden age of science where all kinds of wacky stuff was proposed.
You do a lot of damage with a little bit of knowledge, right?
Yeah, and this is, again, one of those areas where critical thinking helps, and they were trying, but they had observed, and I say they, scientists at the time, had observed that as a child grows, the soft spot grows and the skull grows over that. And they had also observed that different parts of the brain appeared to control different aspects of the personality and the way you thought and the way that you would act. And so they knew that the brain, and so phrenology is based on a couple of core concepts, one of which is the brain is the organ of the mind. It is not homogeneous unity, but an aggregate of mental organs with specific functions. The cerebral organs are topographically localized. And other things being equal, the relative size of any particular mental organ is indicative of the power or strength of that organ. Since the skull ossifies over the brain during infant development, external craniological means could be used to diagnose the internal states of the mental characters. And you look at how many things they sort of kind of got right. We know that the brain has a bunch of different parts to it. We know that different functionality is located in different parts of the brain. We also know the brain, and we know so much more than that. And so they started with these things, and they're kind of close, and then they just completely went off the deep end with looking at lumps in the skull. And for those of us who had Catholic mothers or Jewish mothers who had great skill with a frying pan, you may have more lumps than others. And so they started with this idea. It didn't last very long. I mean, we laugh at it now. But I think if you go back and you look at how close they were to being right, but yet so far from being right? And it's really interesting, but because they didn't have everything down right, they started to use it to justify racism because of the different skull shapes and all this. And it went down some really dark paths in some cases. But it only lasted till like the early 1900s, and real studies of how the brain worked. And the more we know about the brain, the more we realize it was just kind of bunk. But yeah, it is kind of an
phrenology only lasted that long.
Yeah, right. Phrenology only lasted that long. Yeah, we found other excuses for bigotry and the darker sides of human of being human. So yeah, that was kind of interesting. It's interesting, like I said, what they got right, what they got wrong, and how close they were, and also the fact that this was science, and eventually science debunked it.
Yeah, it's good to state, even though he was a little bit off with the lumpy head thing, he did bring forth some really strong scientific method in relation to criminal investigation. So that is one of the things that I think he got right, was trying to bring that kind of information, or the scientific method to trying to, in criminology, in forensics.
Yeah, well, one of the things that popularized phrenology was the fact that at the time, science lectures were seen as entertainment, right? They weren't something you're forced to go to as a high school student or a college student. They were seen as entertainment, and that helped popularize phrenology among the middle class at the time. So yeah.
Well, it looks like Lombroso was also, he was sort of teetering on the edge. We talked a little bit about Isaac Newton, teetering on the edge of spiritualism as well. And that was really popular at the time. I dug into that a little bit. I found something on Wikipedia. As an atheist, Lombroso discusses his views on the paranormal and spiritualism in his book, After Death, What? That was in 1909. In which he believed the existence of spirits and claimed that the medium Eusapia Palladino was genuine. There was an article called Exit Eusapia, was published in the British Medical Journal, November 9th, 1895. And the article questioned the scientific legitimacy of the Society for Psychical Research for investigating Palladino, a medium who had a reputation for being a fraud and an imposter, and who was surprised that Lombroso had been deceived by Palladino. I guess where I'm going with this is that, like Jena had said, just because you're a scientist and just because you don't espouse belief in God doesn't mean that you're not fooling around sometimes with magic. You're not guaranteed to be completely skeptical, completely naturalistic in your beliefs. And sometimes, especially in those earlier days of science and where we are now, there were some really wooey kind of concepts that were floating around. But before I get into that, we'll just talk about, let's see, was it Pierre Curie, who I believe is the husband of Marie Curie, was investigating the mysteries of ordinary magnetism when he became aware of the spiritualist elements of other European scientists. Pierre Curie initially thought the systematic investigation into the paranormal could help with some unanswered questions about magnetism. He wrote to his fiancée, Marie, "I must admit that those spiritual phenomena intensely interest me. I think they are questions that deal with physics." And his notebooks from the period show that he read many books on spiritualism. He didn't attend seances like Palladino. He was, as a spectator, his goal was certainly not to communicate with spirits. He saw the seances as scientific experiments, tried to monitor different parameters, and he took detailed notes of every observation. All while being an atheist. I also wanted to talk really quickly about those other weirdy scientific concepts that we've abandoned as being not sufficiently grounded in evidence. Luminiferous ether, which was a substance that was thought to transmit light. turns out Einstein and other experimenters in diffraction and refraction show that wasn't the case. The Martian canals looked like a little bit hocusy pocusy, but eventually it was proven to not be accurate. Phlogiston was an absolute scientific theory regarding the existence of a fire-like element, the expanding Earth, planet Vulcan, spontaneous generation. I think a lot of times with some of these concepts, these were ideas that somebody cooked up and as an explanation for something. And it had some kind of momentum and it stuck around longer than it should have. But it was ultimately science that proved that these concepts did not have any sufficient basis for assertion. And maybe that's where Labrosco was at. He was thinking about it, and then maybe if he'd lived long enough, he were around today, he would say, "Oh, well, I'm an idiot. I'm sorry," but or not.
I don't necessarily see the harm in one, of course, with this example, him being an atheist, but trending towards this whack idea of, magic or whatever. Especially with Isaac Newton, he for years obsessed over the concept of philosopher's stone, about beating death and trying to extend life and what have you. So if it weren't for people such as these, having the belief at one time and then losing that belief and then teetering in between, but also keeping with the critical thinking of discovering more and investigating more and finding the critical evidence to explain the universe around us. What is the harm? I had this question in my head as we were doing this study. What is the harm in which, you have faith for a moment and you use that and apply it to a scientific theory in order to investigate, a modern problem? If we, a lot of scientists in history have done that, and to which have formulate things that we utilize today. If, we have people like that now, right?
Yeah, I have heard people try to use Pascal's wager, and Pascal was a great mathematician. He had some great work that he did in math. Then, from what I've read, had a psychotic break or an existential crisis, and then spent the later half of his life trying to understand his beliefs and what he thought was metaphysical, and why you should believe in God try to be in a systematic way. He got it really wrong, as Bertrand Russell was able to point out very quickly. But so things like that, I think, are harmful, and they do stick around.
Well, I would say this. I think in one direction, if you can use your faith to inspire you to investigate something more, maybe that's not a problem. But I think the other direction, and what I mean by the other direction is this: he developed the science of phrenology, right, which is the beginning of eugenics. And I think this is something that's a problem in our skeptical community. We talked about this before, how toxic the skeptical community can be, because what I've seen is people will use science as far as they need to take it to justify their beliefs, and then they don't finish it, like the bell curve or phrenology is a silly one, but look at eugenics. I looked up Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes in the decision in Buck v. Bell regarding Virginia's forced sterilization of what was called mental defectives. And his famous quote, 3 generations of imbeciles are enough. Well, that was a half-baked attitude that resulted in a lot of people being forced into sterilization. And of course, there is a little group over there in Europe. You may have heard of them before. They were called fucking Nazis, and they also seem to have no problem with sterilizing people that they thought were, according to their crackpot scienticious thoughts were somehow inferior human beings. So the problem is, I think, if you don't, it goes back to before, a little bit of knowledge can do a lot of harm. Misusing information and not sticking to the scientific method, skipping to experimental methodology to really finding out what the consequences are and what the real science says. Because if you jump the gun because it satisfies your own personal belief set, then you're going to get to a conclusion that can very much harm people.
Yeah, and I think too that just because we can do it doesn't mean we should do it. And I think sometimes with science we kind of forget that. So let's assume for a moment that you can say that eugenics works. Let's assume that for just a second. Does that mean it's ethical to apply that scientific theory to human beings? And the answer is no. So, just because we can do it doesn't mean we should, doesn't mean we should necessarily use the science or the technology at all in that case. And also, and obviously it doesn't work, so it's not true, but there's an ethical consideration that scientists or people who want to apply science sometimes forget. It's not just a practical matter, right? There's also the ethics of how do we treat humans and what kind of human, how do we want other people to treat us in those situations?
Yeah, so that's why we have established public policy things in place, because with the embarrassment of the Tuskegee experiment, with the harm that caused those African-American men when they did those testing upon testing and ultimately killed those men, that's why those ethical issues are and placing in those policies to stop harming human beings in that way. Through science, unfortunately, we have established new ways of discovering things and new ways of protecting human rights. And unfortunately, with inhumane studies, we have discovered even more things that have turned out to be beneficial for us. But we have to keep in mind that applying these unethical testing upon individuals is, you have to balance that out. Is that overall good for humanity, good for science?
Yeah.
Where's the bridge? Yeah.
Well, and the use of science to harm people in an unjust way has not ended. In my research for this, it made me think about how artificial intelligence has been used by law enforcement agencies to predict when people are likely to commit crimes. I remember talking with some friends about this who are involved in machine learning, in AI work. And what they're finding is that human beings are programming racist algorithms. They might not be intentionally programming racist algorithms, but the data itself is the result of racist human action. So
right.
I found the article is going to be in the description, but MIT Technology Review, Artificial Intelligence. This one is from July 17th, 2020. It's not in anything that we shared before the show, but predictive policing algorithms are racist. They need to be dismantled. And the reason for this is if African-American and Latino individuals are targeted by police, then the data is going to show that African-American and Latino individuals are more likely to commit crimes. And therefore, they're going to predict that, if a guy's walking down the street and he happens to be African-American and Latino, he's more likely to be a criminal.
Well, this is also where I think, religion comes in, especially the Abrahamic religions, where you have a God that punishes evildoers, right? And so we have this idea that evildoers must be punished. And so one of the things I would object to with this technology, assuming we actually can get the racist data out of there and make it actually work correctly, is we don't use it to put people into prison. We don't use it to punish. We use it to head off crime. We use it to intervene before it happens and find out, and try to resolve the situation. If they're going to rob a bank because they need money, maybe we go ahead and make sure that we talk to them and say, hey, here, you get them into some programs and other things. If they're just getting really, really mad and getting themselves in, that type of thing, can we diffuse the situation and use that technology to head the problem off and not to put people in prison? As one of the things that I'm trying to think of the movie where they had the three psychics.
Minority Report.
Minority Report, right? They were going to put you into prison for something you hadn't done yet. No, let's use it to head it off and stop it from happening. Now, Minority Report, I think they had the subplot that even if you prevented it, you couldn't, and that was why. But okay, whatever, that's science fiction. But let's use, if we're going to have that technology, let's make sure it's not racist. Let's make sure that it's fair, but also let's use it to head off the problem, not to punish people for stuff they haven't done yet or might do, or worse, wait for them to do.
Yeah. You can't put the genie back in the bottle, but no. I think this is a who watches the watchers problem.
Yes.
That we keep coming back to.
And community policing and getting oversight committees involved in the police process. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm suspicious of first of all of human beings being able to make those decisions, and human beings programming machines to make those predictions. I don't know what the answer to that is. Having programming machines that program machines and identify discrimination and then highlight it. I don't know.
Well, yeah, with the AI and machine learning, it has to do with very large data sets, and keeping that data clean is really very important, because if the data is racist, then the algorithms that are going to be produced will be racist.
Yeah. But it doesn't mean the algorithms are wrong, right? They're being applied to bad data, but the algorithm itself may be a good, decent algorithm. We just need to make sure that the data is skewed correctly and that it is going to be fair, and it's not picking out skin color or eye color or any of these other things out, or whatever else they're using in the algorithm. We just need to make sure, like you said, the data is clean.
That's true. Well, go ahead, Jim.
No, I finished my thought.
Well, what I was going to say is this is a tough one, and I guess we should probably have a data scientist on the show, someone who specializes in this. If we could find one, I'd sure like to have that discussion so we can get into the nuts and bolts of it. But we can scrub skin color or parts of town or certain obvious things. But the results may still be discriminatory because there are some commonalities. I remember, I think I said the other week, I just finished a Chinese in America history book, right? And it was depressing and awful, and also hopeful. But it was what I saw, and I remember learning about this in law school, was the racist laws that were put in place that weren't on their face racist, like laundries that are made out of certain building material were not going to get licenses, and they would be denied permits to operate laundries in San Francisco. Gee, who are they talking about? You have to really, and it affected Chinese people, obviously Chinese Americans, people who had been here for decades, were now going to be disenfranchised and have no ability to earn a living because it was a very lucrative business to operate a laundry in those days. So again, it's the who watches the watcher situation, and it really gives me concern. But again, can't put the genie back in the bottle. We're going to have to deal with it like we will with everything else. And so keeping an eye on it, making sure that we are aware that this is a tendency. It's nice to see this in the MIT Technology Review. It's nice to see that these things exist in the media for us to be aware of. And we'll keep on talking about these subjects, and I want the media to be less about Kim Kardashian and more about where is our society going, right? Because this is interesting stuff, and it's not just interesting; it's really important because we're going to be living together on this earth for the rest of our lives. Let's make it a good life, right?
Right.
So we're gonna have to skip one of our articles just because we've had such a good conversation about this. But I'd like to move on to our last article if we could, in the time that we have left, and that's about the mask. And so this article was the Lansing State Journal.
Michigan.
Yeah, Malty, do you think you could do justice to this article?
I'll give it a try.
Yeah.
So a school in Lansing, Michigan. This is a elementary school, 1st through 5th grade. It is a Catholic school. Has, with the help of 2 of the parents of students there at the school, put a lawsuit against the state for making the children wear masks at school. Because
why, Malty? Why?
Well, they gave a lot of different reasonings in their lawsuit, which we can go over in a bit. But I think the main thrust of it was that we are made in God's image. And so by covering ourselves, we are covering God's image, and therefore we are blaspheming. We are not, that's about as close as I can get. I'm not Catholic. You guys are the Catholics.
So this is the part that gets me more than anything else, right? Is their quote here: in accordance with the teachings of the Catholic faith, Resurrection School believes that every human has dignity, is made in God's image and likeness. The legal complaint reads, unfortunately, a mask shields our humanity, and because God created us in his image, we are masking that image.
Shielding our humanity.
Not Catholic teaching. The phrase made in God's image refers to spirituality. It refers to our souls. It refers to our being able to freely choose to do good and to love, that we're not just reactionary creatures, that we can think. God does not necessarily have 2 arms, 2 legs, and a head. He may be more amorphous than that, or she. This is some people who don't understand their own faith, which is not unusual for Catholics. And I actually went and looked at the Catechism of the Catholic Church, which is the book. If you want to know what Catholics actually believe, you can go pick up that book. They're kind of huge, or if they're small, the type is very small. And it's pretty clear that this is not the case. It is not a face of God. If you put a mask on, you're covering up. And I think
both of the
bishop said that.
Say again?
Did I read it correctly that it was actually a bishop who said that? Someone who should know better. I could get lawyers and lay folk, but if this is a priest or a bishop, then somebody needs to go back to priest school.
The quotes I'm getting from both, from the 2 parents, are talking about, one, the lawsuit takes issue with those mandates not making exceptions when children are safely distancing themselves from one another. And it is impacting the student's ability to, quote, fully engage in religious education.
I picked up those 2 quotes too. Yeah. Malty, what do you got to say about that? Besides, fuck this shit. What do you have to say about that?
I think these 2, I don't want to straw man, but I'm gonna. These 2 parents, in that they have children that are having problems wearing their masks, and they are putting their faith in front of that to try to block any legal repercussion against them, because their children, they think their education is being impacted.
I like that. I like that. You're right. The kids won't keep their mugs covered, so they're suing. They're going on the offensive rather than having to react. That's fun. I like that idea. If I summarized it correctly, is that what you're maybe suggesting? Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds about right. But you being the person with the law degree, what do you think of their chances?
I believe that preventing this was we covered this a bit in the Discord, but I don't think that mask regs are unconstitutional. Yeah. I don't think they can reasonably be argued to be an unconstitutional infringement of our right to privacy or our right of expression under the First Amendment. And just so somebody in the comments doesn't say Johnny thinks that the right to privacy is in the First Amendment. No, I don't think that the right to privacy is in the First Amendment. I was using a comma. Okay. A right to privacy is what? The Fourth Amendment, and the right of expression would be in the First. There's a compelling governmental interest to prevent a pandemic from spreading, and this is narrowly tailored to meet that compelling governmental interest. And I think this goes a little bit also into the whole idea that, remember on Facebook when Facebook was new and people started having kids, and then everyone started showing pictures of their kids, and then it was like heart, but really everyone was thinking, no one cares about your fucking kids. No one wants to see your kids, like, unless they're your niece, your nephew, someone who you're close to, you have a good rapport with the kid. No one cares about your ugly kids. No one wants to see your ugly kids' faces, right? Throw them behind a mask. Stop having them. They already get everybody sick anyway. Parents aren't they usually sick when they have kids? The kids go to school, the kids come back, and everyone's got
dishes for the flu. Yes.
Yeah.
I don't hate kids. They're great. I used to be one. I'm sure I was insufferable, but put a mask on your damn kid. Keep your religion in your freaking pants. All right. I'm frustrated with it.
Yeah.
Why is that so stupid?
And it's not new. I mean, in the Spanish flu, we had the exact same arguments being made, and the exact same stupidity, except that more people wore masks, and we actually got through that without killing nearly as many people as we have this time without going through all the proper protocols.
People used to put holes in their masks to smoke cigars and pipes out of. People would cut holes for their noses. I went online and we talked about this in the Discord. There were jackasses during the Spanish flu, and probably more people died because, Mr. Mustache that connects to his beard had to smoke his pipe on the mean streets of Topeka, Kansas, because he didn't want to be told what to do, because he's a grown man. I don't wear a mask. It's my God-given right. That's what it always comes down to for me.
Right. Basically, these parents are just trying to say, you're impeding on my religious freedoms by having me wear this mask. And it's kind of like me hearing, oh, I have a medical condition, I can't wear a mask, which, okay. There is only one type of medical condition into which you are not allowed to wear a mask, and that's bullshit. That's the only type of medical condition that exists.
What is that one? Which one is that one? Can you educate us, please?
It's bullshit. That's the medical condition. So the fact that anyone displays a fake medical card to say, oh, I have a medical condition to not wear a mask, it's bullshit, because there is no medical condition to refrain you from not wearing a mask. So for them to say that this is infringing on my learning or my kids' learning, well, I mean, yeah, kids are jittery. They want to touch things. They want to pull stuff off their face. They want to put stuff on their face, whatever. The kids will be kids. But the fact that, yes, you're right, Johnny, to play on what you said, it's not against constitutional rights for us to mandate or enact a statewide mandate for us to wear masks, because we're doing this to decrease the incidence of, contracting this virus. So it's like saying, oh, I want to drive 100 miles an hour on a freeway. But, we have to abide by this freeway law limit of, oh, the speed limit is 75 miles an hour. Well, okay, well, you're infringing on my rights for me to go 100 miles an hour on the freeway. But it's the safety for not just you, everyone else around you. That's the point.
My religious freedom to go 99 miles an hour in a 25 mile an hour zone. Well, checkmate.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Jena, that I'm glad you said that bullshit comment, because in the article I was reading about, one of the parents was talking that their children had allergies, and so had tried to get a medical exemption, was denied that medical exemption, and that's when they decided to go with the lawsuit. Stating things like, masks get sweaty, they make it snotty. I'm just change your fucking mask.
Yeah. So they tried to try one way and they lost. So they're like, oh, well, a religious part, right? Yeah. When I wear my mask, it gets a little sweaty. I get a little, breath. I lose my breath going up and down stairs because, you're inhaling more of my CO2. Okay. But the fact that I'm protecting not myself, but everyone else, that matters to me. And people just, I don't know. I can't, it frustrates me because as a medical professional, I just can't comprehend why people are so against this. And I think it's just the overall mentality as Americans of why we just like, oh, I don't want to be told to do this. Like, we have such a problem with authority. It's just baffles me. And I will say this actually, and this actually made me kind of laugh to myself. I sometimes screen for my medical office for work. And one morning I had a patient come in, was obviously a Trump supporter, and she was wearing a face mask that said, make America great again. And the fact that, and honestly, it made me smile. She, looked intimidating. She literally stared me down. It was actually quite interesting. I screened her. I asked her user questions. I gave her a screening sticker and I sent her on her way. And I just thought to myself, you know what? The fact that you're covering your face is good enough for me.
Yeah. I'll take it where I can get it.
Doing so in protest, but the mask was there. Yeah.
But you're still doing it.
Yeah.
Folks, I think that's all the time we have this week. This week we talked about Black skeptics uplifting their community through social justice. A lot of good, positive stuff going on there. Making actual change happen. We talked about how science and religion aren't compatible, but only in the United States. And we talked about why maybe deserves some further thought, I think. And I think that's one of the reasons why we do what we do, is to really highlight the causes of these kind of things. We talked about, does someone else want to say his name besides me? Should I give one of you guys the
opportunity? Lombroso.
Mm-hmm. The same.
Right?
I don't know. Sure. And then we talked about this. Well, bless their hearts. This wonderful, wonderful couple, or some folks in Michigan who don't want their kid to mask up because they want the world to see their ugly fucking kid's face. No offense to the kid.
That's rude.
Yeah, it is very rude. Probably it's a real darling. I don't know. It's not the kid's fault that her parents are assholes. You're just born where you're born. So we had Jim, we had Malty, we had Jena Miyu. Thank you so much for being on the show with me.
It was fun.
We're going to see you again.
Yep. Thank you.
We are the NonProphets, and you can support us on Patreon if you feel like it, if you can afford to do so. That's at patreon.com/thenonprophets. But costs nothing to send us an email. Send us your thoughts. We got Chuck in Arizona sends us a lot of stuff. We love to get stuff from Chuck. So Chuck, I'm calling out to you. Send us more stuff. And there's other folks like Chuck out there. So please send us your thoughts. Send us your criticisms. We want to hear from you. Thank you so much. We'll see you next week.